Snow fell soft over Ashford Hall, but it did nothing to soften the cold that had settled into Duke Ashford's chest these past 3 years. He rode the northern boundary of his estate alone, as he preferred, when he saw her, a girl no older than 20, huddled against the stone wall bordering the frozen road, her shawl too thin, her hands blue at the knuckles. He might have ridden past. He had ridden past beggars before, hardened by a world that had taught him mercy was a currency easily spent and rarely returned. But she did not beg for coin.
Can I have your leftover?
Yes, take it.
Please, sir, she said, her voice cracking not from weakness but from the effort of pride refusing to break, may I eat your leftovers? Her eyes lifted to his, grey, startlingly clear, and utterly without the practiced desperation of the roadside poor. There was something else there. Something that unsettled him in a way he could not name. He looked down at the small parcel of bread and cheese tucked into his saddlebag, meant for his ride home. What is your name? He asked instead of answering. Whitmore, she said, then hesitated, as though the name itself were a wound she carried. Just Whitmore. He dismounted. He did not hand her the parcel. He knelt in the snow beside her and unwrapped it himself, breaking the bread in two, offering her the larger half as though they were equals sharing a meal rather than a duke condescending to charity. Then you shall not eat my leftovers, Miss Whitmore, he said quietly. You shall eat my dinner. And tell me how a woman with such eyes came to be starving on my road. She did not know it yet. Neither did he. But the answer would unmake them both. Duke Ashford brought her to Ashford Hall not as an act of charity displayed for others, but quietly, through the servants' entrance, wrapped in his own greatcoat against the judgment of a household unaccustomed to such gestures from their master. It was Clara Hastings, the housekeeper, who met them in the kitchen passage, her candle raised, her expression shifting from alarm to something far stranger the moment the light fell upon the girl's face. Merciful heaven, Clara whispered, so quietly only she heard it. She said nothing more that night. But her hands trembled as she prepared a bath and a bed in the small chamber off the servants' hall, and her eyes did not leave the girl's face, not her ragged clothes, not her thinness, but her face, as though she were reading a letter written in a hand she had once known intimately and thought long buried. Lady Whitmore, for that was the only name she would give, offered like a shield rather than a truth, slept that night beneath a roof for the first time in what she admitted, haltingly, over a bowl of broth, had been nearly a year. My family lost everything, she told the Duke the following morning, when he found her in the small garden behind the kitchens, unable to sit idle despite Clara's insistence. A debt, they said. Forged papers, I always believed, though I was too young and too powerless to prove otherwise. My father died of the shame of it. My mother did not long survive him. I was sent to distant relations who wanted nothing more than another mouth removed from their table. And the estate? The Duke asked. The title, if there was one. Something flickered across her face, old grief, older anger. Passed to a cousin. A man my father once called friend. She looked away. I do not speak his name. It brings me nothing but the taste of bile. The Duke said nothing, but something cold and precise moved behind his eyes, the same instinct that had once made him formidable in matters of law and land before grief had driven him to solitude. That afternoon, he summoned Clara to his study. You knew her, he said. Not a question. Clara's composure, usually unshakable, cracked at last. Your Grace, I served the Whitmore household as a girl. Before the ruin. Before, she stopped herself, pressing her lips together as though holding back a name too dangerous to speak aloud. Before what, Clara? Before Lord Pembroke destroyed them, she said. And made himself the beneficiary of every paper he forged. The Duke rose slowly from his chair. He knew Pembroke. Pembroke had dined at his table not a fortnight past. The Duke did not confront Lord Pembroke that week, nor the next. A man who had spent a decade building his reputation on patience and precision did not unravel it with a hasty accusation. Instead, he watched. He listened. And he gave Lady Whitmore something she had not possessed in 3 long years, safety enough to remember. She began to stay at Ashford Hall not as a guest quietly tolerated, but as a presence the household found itself, almost against its will, arranging itself around. She read to the elderly steward whose eyes had failed him. She mended linens with a seamstress's careful hand, though she claimed no formal training in it. She spoke French to the visiting solicitor without thinking, then flushed crimson when the Duke's brow lifted in quiet surprise. "Where did a beggar girl learn French, Miss Whitmore?" he asked her one evening, as they walked the long gallery where portraits of Ashford ancestors watched with painted indifference. "I do not know," she admitted. "It comes to me as breathing does. I have never questioned it. I assumed. I do not know what I assumed. That some kindly woman taught me, before the world grew cruel." The Duke said nothing, but he noted it, as he noted everything now, filing each small detail beside Clara's confession like evidence assembling itself toward a verdict he had not yet permitted himself to reach. It was Clara who broke first. She came to him one night with an old, water-stained letter, her hands unsteady. "I kept this," she said. "For years I told myself it was foolish sentiment. Now I believe it was God keeping it safe until it mattered." The letter was from Lady Whitmore's mother, written to Clara in the final months before the family's ruin, a letter naming her daughter not merely Whitmore, but Eleanor Whitmore, sole heiress to the earldom of Raeburn, a title and estate that had, by public record, passed to a distant cousin upon the family's disgrace. The cousin's name was recorded plainly. Reginald Pembroke. The Duke read it twice, then a third time, his jaw tightening with each pass. "She does not know," he said quietly. "No, Your Grace. I do not believe she does." He looked toward the window, toward the dark shape of the garden where, even now, Eleanor Whitmore walked alone beneath the stars, unaware that the name she carried like a wound was in fact a birthright, and that the man who had smiled across his dinner table not a month before had built his entire fortune upon her family's destruction. "Say nothing to her yet," the Duke said. "Not until I have proof enough to bury him with it." But proof, he suspected, would not be difficult to find. Men who forge one signature rarely stop at one. The proof came from an unlikely source, Pembroke's own solicitor, a nervous, aging man named Mr. Follett, who arrived at Ashford Hall unannounced on a grey Tuesday, requesting a private audience with a voice that shook more than his years alone could explain. "I have carried this weight for 11 years, Your Grace," Follett confessed, once the study door was closed. "I drafted the papers Lord Pembroke presented as proof of the Raeburn debts. I did not know, then, that the signatures were false. I have known for a long while since. I told myself silence was safer than ruin. I told myself many things." He set a leather folio upon the desk with trembling hands. "I can no longer tell myself anything at all." Inside were the original ledgers, the true accounts of the Raeburn estate, showing no debt, no default, no cause whatsoever for the family's disgrace. Alongside them, damning correspondence between Pembroke and a forger long since fled to the continent, arranging the fabrication of the very papers that had stripped Eleanor Whitmore's father of his name, his title, and ultimately his life. That was the moment everything changed. The Duke sat with the folio long after Follett had gone, the fire burning low, and understood that he now held in his hands not merely the truth, but a weapon capable of destroying a man who had, until this moment, moved through society untouched and unsuspected. He found Eleanor in the library, where she had taken to reading in the evenings, curled into the window seat with a book she had not turned a page of in some time. "I must tell you something," he said, "and I ask that you sit, and that you allow me to finish before you speak." She searched his face and went very still, as though some old instinct warned her that stillness was the only armor she had left. He told her everything, her mother's letter, the true name Clara had recognized the moment she'd seen her face, the ledgers, the forged signatures, the 11 years of silence that had ended only that afternoon. "You are not Miss Whitmore, orphan of no consequence," he said. "You are Lady Eleanor Whitmore, rightful Countess of Raeburn. And the man who destroyed your family is the same man who dined at my table and called himself my friend. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then, quietly, devastatingly, she began to weep, not the tears of grief alone, but of years of unbelonging finally given a name and a reason. I used to dream of who I was, she whispered. I told myself it was foolishness. That a starving girl had no business dreaming of titles and lost estates. I made myself stop dreaming, because it hurt less to believe I had never been anyone at all. The Duke knelt before her, as he had knelt in the snow the day they met, and took her trembling hands in his. You were always someone, Eleanor, he said. The world simply had not yet caught up to the truth of you. It is about to. News of the discovery could not remain contained within the walls of Ashford Hall, and within a fortnight, whispers began threading through the drawing rooms of Yorkshire society. A duke, they murmured, sheltering a beggar girl now claimed to be a lost countess. Some found it romantic. Others found it scandalous. Lord Pembroke found it, above all else, a threat to be extinguished before it could take root. He came to Ashford Hall himself, smiling as easily as he had at every dinner before, though his eyes carried none of the warmth his mouth performed. I hear remarkable tales, Ashford, he said, settling into a chair uninvited. A dead man's daughter, risen from the roadside to claim an earldom 11 years buried. Surely you do not credit such fancies. The girl is clearly troubled. Perhaps deranged by hardship. I would not wish you to embarrass yourself before the whole of the county over a beggar's delusions. I have Follett's confession, the Duke said quietly. And the original ledgers. Bearing your correspondence, Pembroke, in your own hand. For the briefest moment, something cracked behind Pembroke's composed face, but he recovered it swiftly, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth entirely. Follett is an old fool who will say anything to save his own neck. Documents can be forged twice over, Ashford, and I promise you, I have friends enough in the courts to ensure whatever you present is buried before it ever sees daylight. Think carefully before you make an enemy of me. I have ruined better men than you for far less inconvenience. He left without another word, and the Duke stood a long while in the silence after, understanding fully now the shape of the war he had entered. That evening, the blow came swiftly. A messenger arrived with word that Mr. Follett had been arrested, charged, absurdly, with theft from Pembroke's own household, his testimony instantly rendered worthless by a criminal record invented within hours. The ledgers, still in the Duke's possession, were now the only surviving proof, and Pembroke had already begun murmuring to his allies in London that the Duke of Ashford had lost his senses over an impostor with a pretty face and a convenient story. Eleanor came to the Duke's study that night, pale and resolved. You did not ask for this fight, she said. I could disappear. Take Clara's kindness and vanish before I cost you your name alongside mine. Eleanor. He crossed the room and took her face gently in his hands. I did not share my bread with you in the snow because I expected an easy road afterward. I am not afraid of Pembroke's threats. But even as he said it, he understood that threats such as Pembroke's rarely remained merely threats for long. The blow, when it came, was aimed not at the Duke, but at Eleanor herself. Within days, word spread through Yorkshire that Lady Whitmore, the so-called lost Countess of Rayburn, had been formally accused of fraud, her claim to the earldom dismissed by a magistrate conveniently indebted to Lord Pembroke's influence. Worse, a charge was laid against her directly, that she had conspired with a disgraced solicitor to fabricate documents in an attempt to swindle a respected peer of his rightful inheritance. She was to be brought before the county court within the week. They will not listen to reason, the Duke said grimly, pacing his study while Clara wept quietly by the fire and Eleanor sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap as though she had already resigned herself to a verdict already written. Pembroke has bought every year that matters. Then perhaps he has already won, Eleanor said softly. Perhaps he won 11 years ago, and all of this, the snow, the bread, the kindness of a duke who owed me nothing, was only ever a brief and beautiful delay before the ending that was always coming. Do not speak so, the Duke said, sharper than he intended, though his voice cracked with something closer to fear than anger. I did not survive my own grief these past 3 years to watch injustice take you from me now. It was Clara who broke the despair with trembling urgency. Your Grace, Follett. Before his arrest, he told me he had made a second copy of the ledgers. Hidden, he said, in case Pembroke ever tried what he has now attempted. He would not tell me where. He said only that he trusted the truth to find its own way home. The Duke seized on this thread of hope like a drowning man seizes driftwood, but 2 days of searching Follett's modest lodgings turned up nothing, and the eve of the court date arrived with the copy still unfound and Pembroke's smile, by all accounts, growing wider by the hour. That night, Eleanor stood alone in the garden where she had once walked unaware of her own stolen name, and for the first time since the Duke had found her in the snow, she allowed herself to weep freely, not for the earldom, not even for justice, but for the unbearable thought of being torn from the one place, and the one man, who had finally made her feel as though she belonged somewhere in the world. The Duke found her there and said nothing at first, only wrapped his coat around her shoulders as he had that very first day. Whatever the court decides tomorrow, he said quietly, you are not alone in it. Not now. Not ever again. And if it is not enough, she whispered. He did not answer, because he did not know. For the first time in years, the Duke of Ashford, a man who had built his life on precision and control, found himself utterly, terrifyingly powerless against the coming dawn. The courtroom fell silent as the door burst open, Mr. Follett himself, pale but alive, a second ledger clutched in his hands, having escaped confinement through a clerk's quiet mercy and ridden through the night to reach them. The proof was undeniable. Pembroke's forgery, his correspondence, his 11 years of theft laid bare before the magistrate and all of Yorkshire society watching. Justice moved swiftly once truth was finally permitted to speak. Pembroke was stripped of title and land, his crimes exposed beyond any influence's reach. Eleanor was restored, Countess of Raeburn, her name, her birthright, her dignity returned in full. That winter, snow fell again over Ashford Hall as Eleanor became Duchess, not for what she had once been, but for who she had proven herself to be, a woman who had once begged for leftovers, and was loved, wholly, ever after. What would you have done in her place?